Welcome to Ann Arbor Democracy, a place for conversation about how our local leaders are elected and how political decisions are made, what this looked like in the past and what it looks like now. This project aims to explore the recent history and current reality of Ann Arbor democracy. This is part 2 of an interview with longtime resident, activist, and historian Shirley Beckley. Shirley grew up in Ann Arbor and has spent almost all of her adult life here, working on issues that impact the local Black community. In part 1, Shirley talked about events that threatened to disrupt that community. In part 2, we talk more about challenges in the public schools, activism pushing back on the local police department, and leaders of the time, including the first Black mayor of Ann Arbor, Al Wheeler.
I started working when I was in 12th grade at Jacobson's in Ann Arbor. And I remember I made $1.10 an hour.
Wow, that's quite a wage.
And I worked in the stock room. We could not work as sales ladies. We, being Black, we had to be back in the stock room. But then when they were short, they would ask some of us to come out on the floor and be sales ladies. And so I started protesting at Jacobson's. I said, well, now you don't mind me being a sales lady when you need somebody, when somebody's sick. So how come you just don't? I want a better position. I don't want to be in the stock room. And so I would gripe. And Mr. Friedrichs was head of Jacobson's back there. And I would go to Mr. Friedrichs and I'd say, I just think it's wrong that you don't hire us. And I can do it when you need me, but you won't hire me. So what, to shut my mouth, he hired me as I'm trying to think of the name of it. I answered the phones for Jacobson's. And in the winter time, at Christmas time, I was over the gift wrapping, but not a sales lady. They hired one lady, Miss Jones. She was an older lady. She was a sales lady for a long time. She was the only sales lady. And then they started hiring a couple more Black people. So at least it opened the door. I wasn't one, but I rattled the cage.
It needed to be rattled.
That needed to be rattled, yeah. I mean, I knew things were wrong. I was trying to put it all together as to why. What was so wrong with us that people didn't like us just because of the color? I couldn't understand that as a young person.
There were a couple of incidents that you were a part of, a direct witness to, and 50 years removed from them, I'm looking at articles that are written about them, and I want to explore them a little bit with you because you were there, and that's sort of the whole point of this. There was the incident at Pioneer High School, and I've read articles, and I am interested in hearing your take on what happened then.
Well, it's quite a incident. I worked for the ombudsman's office, and Dr. Potts.
This is with the school district. You were actually employed by the school district.
I was employed by the school district. And I was a community organizer. But basically my job was to go to the secondary level schools and make sure racism wasn't going on. And I took my job seriously. And I went around to the schools. If there was an incident, I would involve myself and try to set up meetings and come to some conclusion to resolve the issue. And our school system, we wanted to make sure our kids, because at that time, we didn't have Black teachers. We had, when I went to Pioneer High School, we had 2 Black teachers, Mr. Ellis and Mr. Clemens. And so through the church, the Black churches, we got together and we went to the school board and we demanded that they hire more Black employees, teachers and administrators, which they did. But it wasn't just about race. It was any child that was being mistreated. So there were things that needed correcting that at that time, we were supposed to try and fix. But getting back to the riot, there had been some rumblings going on and threats made that they were going to riot, and we didn't pay. We
That
didn't
they
pay
were gonna. We got to say who the they was.
some white male students. Now, back at that time, they were called greasers. I guess because they wore their hair straight, and I don't know why they were called greasers, but that's what they called them. So the first thing they did, they got some white paint and they painted the N word on the front of Pioneer. That was the first thing. And then they said they were coming back. So the next day, the ombudsman's office, we went to the high school. And we were there basically to protect the black kids because they were going to attack the black kids. That's what they said they were going to do. So they came in. It's been such a long time ago. I don't know how many of them it was. But it was a group of young white male students. They came in through the parking lot entrance. And they marched. And I was told to keep the black kids in the cafeteria, which I attempted to do. But the male students came in with rifles on their shoulder and swinging nunchucks and saying the N word and saying that N blood was going to be running through the halls. That was their chant. There were administrators there. There were police, but no one was stopping them. So I asked one of the administrators, I said, so you're not going to stop them? They got weapons and they're chanting and you're not going to stop them? And I didn't get a response. They just told me to keep the black kids. You just keep the kids in the cafeteria. But as the white students got closer, the black students said, well, we're not going to back down. They want to fight, we'll fight. And so they came out in the hall. So I was between the white students coming with weapons and the black kids coming out of there. So I removed myself from the middle. And they clashed and started fighting. Now, once they started fighting, then the police got active, but they were grabbing black kids. And black kids were running out of the school. They were just, it was a melee. It was something to see. But when I went outside, one of the officers had one of the black female students on the ground. She was on her stomach. And he had his foot in her back. And she was crying. And I approached him and I said that I worked for the school. And I said, if you just take her foot out of her back, I'll put her in the car for you, but don't hurt her like that. He arrested me and 7 other black kids and took us down to the police station. I remember when they had the young lady in the car and they had another student in the car. They had us in the back seat. And so it was crowded. And so the police officer sat on me because there wasn't no room. So he just sat on top of me as we went down to City Hall.
Wow. And
when we got to City Hall, they put me in a room, and then a female officer came in. I'll always remember her. Her name was Mary. And she was very polite. But she told me I had to take my clothes off. I told her I ain't taking off nothing. And she said, well, I have to strip search you. I said, I don't have a weapon. I don't even know why I'm here. I shouldn't be here. But I'm not stripping. And if you touch me, we'll fight. So we just had this standoff looking at each other. I guess she's trying to figure out what she was going to do with me. And I'm preparing to fight because I'm not taking my clothes off. I'm pissed that we're even there. But she was very polite, and she said, I tell you what, just lift your shirt up and let me make sure you don't have a weapon in your bra. So I lifted up my shirt so she could see I didn't have a weapon. I said, this is so... But they dropped the charges because all of it was ridiculous. But I lost my job behind it.
And there are articles about that.
Yes.
And that turned into quite a fiasco for you.
That turned in, and there was at that time, Brian Westfield was a teacher there. And that's another whole story. But Brian was, I went to school with Brian. He went to Pioneer. Annie also taught. Annie was a coach for the girls' track team. So Brian testified on my behalf. So the charges were dropped. But they charged me with interfering. Even though Dr. Potts and our superintendent, Bruce McPherson, were supportive of me, but he said he had to let me go because of the incident. I never understood that, but I just lost my job.
What did you do after you lost your job with the schools?
I think I did get a job I got a job with Model Cities after that. Because at the time, we did as a community have a little group that would meet at the community center, and Dr. Wheeler was over that group. He and Ezra Rowry. There was a gentleman named Ezra Rowry who was very active and involved in Model Cities. And so we would meet, and they knew about this incident that happened at Pioneer. So anyway, I got a job with Model Cities as a community organizer.
I can't think of a recent example that is similar to Model Cities in terms of outlining the goals of a program, outlining particularly the goal of empowering local community members. At least in words on the page, it sounded amazing, at least in theory.
It was amazing in theory, but Ann Arbor had problems. The money got, I think, mismanaged, and so the program but that happened doing some research, that happened in a lot of states and cities. They just gave them this money, and then the community came together to try to do, and we did good things, but because I wasn't on the board, I'm not privy to what all went on with the board, because I was a worker. But we had, while I was there, 2 directors. We went through 2 directors, and they just wasn't handling the money right. And I think some people saw it as an opportunity to kind of take some of that money. That's what I think. But I don't have no proof of that. That's just me talking. But Model Cities was a good idea. It just didn't carry. But I just think the government didn't do its job in making sure it was handled properly. And then the community didn't do its job to make sure. And so we lost the money. Most cities did. They lost the money, that little bit of money.
Can we talk about the Percy Jones incident a little bit?
Yes. Okay, that was through Model Cities, and so we had taken the kids down to West Park for recreation. The police came running in helmets and shields and shooting. And so all I knew to do was tell the kids to just get on the ground. They had no regard. We had little kids all the way up to teenagers. They had no regards for our children. And actually, Percy Jones was the one that got shot. And nothing was done. We went to city council, we being the community and staff of Model Cities, and asked the mayor and council for a police oversight commission then. And were laughed at.
And where did this take place?
In West Park. Now, when you read the article doesn't tell the story at all the way it happened.
I sent you an article that I found, and
Yeah.
it did not match what you shared with me at all.
And I even, because I am an elder, I said, well, let me call somebody that worked there that I'm friends with to make sure my mind is working right. And she said, you know that isn't what happened. We contested, protested, and didn't get anywhere. But they shot Percy. They didn't kill him, but they shot him. But they arrested him. And then they brought these charges saying that the young black men, through the article that you gave me, some white lady said there were black kids beating up white kids, and that isn't what was going on at all. They said they was looking for somebody. That situation was, we were taking the kids to West Park for recreation because West Park was close. Model Cities was located on Miller Ave, right off of Main Street. And so we would just walk down to Chapin and take the kids. So that particular day, we took them down there because you had crafts down there, and we actually had things going on at the parks. You know, in the wintertime, they would freeze over the ground, and we had ice skating at Summit, which is now Wheeler Park, and West Park, and other parks. We don't have that anymore because now you got to pay if you want to ice skate. We had a little shed, put our glove, there was a little oven, little stove in there, and you go in there and warm up and come outside, and we'd ice skate. And we didn't have to worry about paying, which we do now, because you have to pay to do anything at the parks.
I want to talk a little bit about Al Wheeler and his election in the 70s, what that meant for your community. Obviously, he had been involved in model cities. I'd like to talk about that a little bit because from a distance in time, looking back on it, it is held up as a historic event. And most of us weren't there to understand just what it meant. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it wasn't an easy election, but we were all excited that we would have a black mayor. I remember there was a lot of opposition, and even when he won, they asked for a recount because they just didn't believe that he could be, that was possible, that a black man would be mayor.
That piece of it is so interesting to me. People at the time really tried everything. They challenged
everything.
They challenged Carol Ernst's candidacy.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying everything to undo that election.
And at that time, the Republicans were in power. So, of course, Al was a Democrat. And so you knew which side you had. You knew who was a Republican and you knew who was Democrats. Like I knew the Bonastiles were Republicans. They were high-powered Republicans. So you know who was on what side. As now, we all Democrats and we don't know who's on what side.
That's pretty accurate. Wow.
We know they're not acting like Democrats. So I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't have proof. But I do remember the when Ann Arbor became more Democratic in their voting, the Republicans switched so that they could run for office. And so I think that's why we have all this contention that we got going on, because they're not real Democrats.
Well, it is interesting to read reporting on local politics of that time period in the 70s.
And it's interesting because for a long time, in Al Wheeler, the other thing about, let me get back to Al Wheeler, when he was mayor, one of his pet peeves was that Lansky junkyard. And Lansky junkyard was right there by Depot and Summit. which was the black neighborhood. And so we had to deal with the smells and the junk and at that time, Mayor Wheeler was like, I'm going to have that removed, which he did. And a lot of white people didn't like that because he was adamant about that.
And that was a campaign issue. I saw that
Yes.
on literature of the time.
And so Lansky did end up moving it. And they made sure that Al had a hard time as mayor, and they questioned everything that he did, but he hung in there. But they made sure he didn't run again.
He didn't run again.
He thought about it, but that was a lot of stuff.
In part 3, Shirley reflects on changes she's seen in the city, how her former neighborhood was gentrified, and the difference between activism then and now. Like and subscribe if you'd like to be alerted to more content like this.